we had a cold open.
We did? Do we ever really have a cold open?
No, this isn't the cold open.
Are you sure?
Pretty sure.
Every time we say this isn't the podcast, it turns out to be the podcast.
Fuck, what was it?
I'm putting this in.
I'm going to cut it out. I have first cut.
After 5 or so rejected cold open topics, I said, what if we do the cold open about the difficulty of coming up with a cold open? And you said, we've done that before.
We've totally done that. 100%.
But what if we did it about different bad cold opens? Then you said something about, I want to talk about my loop.
Oh, yeah, my loop.
Okay. You have to leave all this in now.
I'm just going to start with, oh, yeah, my loop.
Podcast gold.
Brad.
What?
One of the things that happens as you get older is it becomes harder to see things up close.
Oh, don't say that. Dude, don't even. Let's not even. I got it. What? Okay. Well, I'm starting to feel really silly about the progressive lenses that I just got.
So I got clip-on loop lenses.
I think I should have gotten what you are doing right now instead.
Well, so you can do both. That's the thing. Is
okay.
Like I was doing some fine detail soldering a few weeks ago, and I couldn't see the little tiny SMT components. And I was like, I don't have readers yet because I haven't been to the eye doctor since the pandemic. That's coming up soon. But I was like, hey, I need to see something up close. So I went on Amazon, as one does, and I looked and I found like a $20 set of 3 lenses that clip onto the arm of your glasses. And it's super duper magnifiers. And it makes me want to actually spend money and get real like surgeon loops for up close work because the problem with these is you have to be pretty close. Like they work like magnifying glass. I want the ones that like surgeons wear so that it's like a telescope on their head. But I'm all about this loop life now, man.
Yeah, I think you need to spend a little more time describing what they look like. We're going to link them in the show notes, I guess. But like they look extremely steampunk.
It is the steampunk aspect of this is unfortunate. I'm not going to lie.
Not desirable.
I got no beef. As with the juggalos and the furries, the steampunk people are okay.
Enjoy whatever subculture you enjoy, but it doesn't necessarily mean you want to be sporting a Victorian monocle.
These aren't brass. They're
That's true.
Cheap steel. So I feel like I'm safe on that front. These basically there's like an alligator clip on one side, and then there's a little springy bar that kind of adds tension. And then there's 3, I don't know, they're like pivots on the end of the bar that you can bring down different levels of magnification into your field of view. And if you line it up right on the glasses, then it's exactly in the center of your field of view. So you can get like pretty good magnification without a whole lot of distortion and stuff on something that's like, 2 feet away from your head, probably.
Yes. I mean, I was thinking more along the lines of describing them as like a prop from the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen or something.
Yeah, it looks like something somebody wore in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yes, that's what I was getting at, but
they're not goggles.
No, not quite. But did you use the term readers? Is that a term for glasses with progressive lenses? Because that's exactly what I just got. I
think readers are technically what things you get at the drugstore that are just for reading up close.
Over the counter magnification glasses. I see.
Yeah, okay. But I don't know.
I went and burned my every 2-year eye insurance benefit on a pair of progressive lenses.
Hell yeah.
Frames.
How's it going?
I haven't worn them yet.
Oh, people are real up in. So this is the conversations you have when you get older are weird because I had this conversation with some parents the other day.
Yeah.
And one of them was like, I just went straight for back to normal ass bifocals because I couldn't deal with the transition at all.
It's disorienting. I have not gotten used to it enough to actually wear them for any long period of time.
When we were working in the whiskey basement, I got a new pair of glasses one day and they had messed up the optical center of the lens when they ground them. And I didn't realize it until I walked out and I misjudged where the curb was because like it was my vision is bad. I have a strong prescription. But I like it fucked up my depth perception enough that like I thought that the curb was 2 feet closer to me than it was or something. And I stepped down like I was going to step down and the ground hit my leg beforehand and I completely beefed it. And I went back in and I was like, hey, can you look at these? I think something's not right. And he's like, oh, wow. Yeah. Well, they really messed these up. Let me send them back. We'll get new ones. We'll get them tomorrow or the next day.
It's a lot better than the alternative of the curb ending before you thought it was going to, that you may take a header out into the street.
I almost fell into the street. It was real close. it was funny because they were fine inside the store because there were enough other cues that my brain was able to like work out what was going on. But as soon as I got out into the open, it was like full. I don't know. It must be what mice feel like when they get stuck in the middle of the room.
How are you supposed to QA your own pair of glasses? Like, how would you know?
Man, how do you know that orange is really orange, man?
Okay, this is getting too deep for this podcast.
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad, and I am very excited about this episode.
It seems like it's been like 25 years since we spoke last. It's been a long week.
It really has been quite a hectic few weeks behind us here.
We both battled the Electronic 3 and we have triumphed. We have prevailed. And now it's time to talk about something completely unrelated.
Video games.
Video games.
E3 is a slumbering dragon that may yet rear its head again. I'm confident.
Let's do a little tone setting. E3 was in Atlanta, I believe, during this era.
97, 98 were the two Atlanta E3s. So kind of, you know what? Yes. Okay, sure.
95, 96 was too, wasn't it?
No, 95, 96 were in LA.
Oh.
97 was the first Atlanta E3, which I know because that was when I was about to graduate high school and then instead said, what if I drive to Atlanta instead of going to my graduation ceremony?
You did your first battle with the Electronic 3 instead of going to high school graduation?
Yep.
It was a good choice.
Also, I went down there on a lark with a week's notice because somebody I had never met on IRC said, hey, I might have an extra E3 pass if you show up.
E3 passes were hard to get then.
They were not easy.
I mean, to get. Look, I've been an active working member of the technology press and been denied an E3 pass before.
Wow. No kidding. This was a weird enough era that there was such a thing as a guest pass, quote unquote. Like you didn't have to have a name on it. Like, I guess they probably gave them out to VIPs if I had to guess. And it was just like, oh, whoever ends up with one of these probably knows somebody important enough to get in anyway. So here you go. Like you took it. It was an unnamed pass and you took it to the registration desk and blah, blah, blah. They gave you a badge.
Yeah.
Also, I was 17 and E3 is
18 only.
E3 is an 18 and up show. And I basically, on some level, I think I owe my career to the nice old lady behind the registration counter who was like, are you sure you're old enough to get into the show? And I was like, I think so. And
yes, ma'am.
Yes, exactly. In my most polite, like young Southern sort of demeanor. And she was like, okay, here you go. And then the rest was history.
I feel like you'd have better luck with that in Atlanta than in LA.
Yes, absolutely.
Brooke, no nonsense.
Wow, I never even thought about that. They probably were hiring local event staff, right?
Yeah,
for that. So yes, Southern charm and manners go a long way.
Wow.
In that scenario.
It's funny. I often think about the people like those forks in the road. Right. Anyway, let's not. What are we here to talk about this week, Brad?
I don't mean to get so off topic here, but it's not entirely off topic.
It's on topic, I think. 1995 was a heck of a year, it turns out.
96.
I know, but 95 is when everybody was talking. Oh, on June 22nd, 1996, something important happened, Brad.
It sure did. It certainly did. Quake came out.
The Quake.
The one and only. There is only one. I mean, actually, there are like, what? Five or six of them now.
I mean, in there's a live service thing.
Depending on how you count them. But there's really only one.
Yeah, there can be only one. That's the motto of Quake.
Yes. So, yeah, Quake, one of the, for me personally and industry-wide, one of the most influential games ever made. Came out. At the time of the posting of this podcast, we are 2 days short of the 25th anniversary of the release of Quake.
No, we're 4 days short. Wait, it's the 18th. Oh, at the time of the posting.
Yeah, at the time of the posting.
Right. When the recording, we're recording. Yeah, well, we're recording this on Friday. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, when people hear this, it'll be just short. But I'm actually not sure if that just means the No, that was the shareware release.
Yeah, the retail release was later. The shareware was out early. No, that's not right. You could buy it immediately on the shareware because I went to EB and I bought the disc version that wasn't the shareware thing.
Okay.
And it just worked.
Interesting. Okay. I ordered the retail disc straight from id.
So the thing that I was thinking about in 1995 was when they released Q3 Test. Was when Carmack released Q3 Test.
I think that was 96 actually. Oh, Q3. Wait, Q3 Test or You're talking about Q Test, right?
Q Test. Sorry, not Q3 Test.
Yeah, that was February 24th, 96. We actually just passed that 25th anniversary back in February.
Wow,
that was pretty. So that is what I forgot to put in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Q Test?
No, but you just reminded me the one thing I kept trying to remember that I was going to put in these show notes. It's the how compressed development cycles were back then, which we will touch. We will touch on.
I was going to talk about that. Yeah,
I'll let me just stick that in here.
Well, so the thing for me, Quake is an important game for the industry. Quake is the reason that I learned about computers.
Yes, that's what we're really here to talk about. I think is like Quake was the gateway into so many computer related, network related, like you name it, computing technologies. Quake was like the gateway to all of that stuff for me and probably you.
It kind of started with Doom and Wolfenstein and like the games I played on my 386, like X-Wing and TIE Fighter and XCOM and stuff like that. But Quake was the one that like it's really big in my mind, partly because it was the multiplayer game for a really long time. Like Quake was the first multiplayer game I played on the internet for any appreciable length of time. Mm-hmm. And it was the game I played until Quake 3 came out in like 1999 or 2000.
I knew you were a person of refined taste and distinction.
Look, I think we all dipped into a little bit of Half-Life DM in 98, right? Yes. Like that was a cool thing.
Well, I'm mostly talking about whether you made the jump to Quake 2 or not. And it sounds like
Quake
you did
2,
not.
Man.
It's okay. We are of the same mind here. I mean, look, I have nothing against Quake 2, but
it's fine.
It's not Quake 1.
10 hertz input is a real kick in the teeth when you had a machine that could run faster than 10 hertz.
Yeah. The railgun was an interesting idea, but
I love the railgun. It's great in Quake 3.
Other than that, not the same. Anyway.
Yeah. So Doom, I was a freshman when Doom came out, when Doom Shareware came out.
Freshman in high school?
In college.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Dang. I lived in the dorm
Doom
and
1.
my room.
Doom 1.
Doom 1.
Just to clarify.
The Doom Shareware was released during finals in my first semester in college. My roommate worked in the computer lab in the basement, and we broke the network the first night like everybody else did.
I love that's such a classic Doom story. Like every bank and university in the country had their IPX network go down the night that Doom Shareware came out.
He was afraid he was going to lose his work study. It was real bad. And then like we played Doom. I played Doom a lot. I played Doom all through college, the first year or two. Duke Nukem, Descent. What else? Rise of the Triad a little bit. I feel like
Rise of the Triad. Are you talking multiplayer specifically or just FPSs in general?
Well, no, these were the games. These were the multiplayer games. Like you could play them head to head over a modem. Like you dialed into somebody else's phone number and they had their computer hooked up and you could modem into them. But like the idea that you could log onto the internet at that time, if you wanted to play Doom against like 8 people, you either had to have a LAN, which we did in the basement of the dorm. And we were never allowed to do that again after the first night, or you could go, like you could pay for Dwango or one of those services that was like you dialed into a phone number that may or may not be long distance, and then you could play modem games against like 8 other people using some special stuff that they figured out. But then Quake came out and like it just had multiplayer built in. It didn't work with modems at all, really.
TCP/IP multiplayer. I think that's the real.
Yeah,
that's the real story there, right? Because like all the multiplayer in those other games was mostly IPX based, right?
It was IPX or it was stuff that was like would work inside the equivalent of a TCP/IP subnet, usually like behind a router.
Okay.
Once you had to cross a router, you usually couldn't connect because there was no way to address spaces on the other side of that stuff.
Right, but multiplayer that worked over proper ass TCP/IP just with the internet was like probably the single biggest deal about Quake. But Quake defined.
No, dude, the biggest thing was 3D.
You think so?
The fact that it was so. Like Doom,
we're getting ahead of ourselves if we're going to start arguing about what is the most important legacy of the game.
But I mean, this is the crux of it. Why is this?
That's why we're talking about the game, though. Yes, you're right.
Yeah, it's important because it was the first like 3D ass 3D game. Like Doom looked like it was 3D on a screen, but those maps were essentially flat 2D files that just described where walls went, and then the walls were a fixed height and
like walls and height maps, basically, right? Or like a height map.
Yeah, like it was how far off the z-axis you were, and height map, but you couldn't do like a hump in Doom.
I believe it used a polar coordinate system. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But you're right. I mean, like the practical upshot of that is you could not have rooms on top of rooms. Like that was the thing.
Yeah.
You could not have proper actual 3D spaces. You could just have kind of a weird 3D-ish approximation of a 2D space.
Technically, the build engine did that by alternating splines and with the BVZ axis, but it was mostly trickery and not actual 3D.
Yes. So, I mean, yeah, like generally we are here to talk about Quake because it was the first fully 3D game, because it was the first game with TCP/IP multiplayer, because it was the first game with like true, proper, extensible modding support. Like the list just goes on and on of the first
of the metaverse.
They can't. I guess that's where we're headed. All right.
Mouse look.
So no, I'm very frustrated about this. That was plus M look. The day that I typed plus, and we'll get to this because even the freaking admin console in the game client was a huge deal. But the day that I typed right, but the day that I typed plus M look into Quake for the first time was a life-changing day all on its own. And I assumed that it was the first game with mouse look, but according to some authorities on the matter, it is not. But we'll get to that.
So Dark Forces had it, man.
You didn't click my link. I see.
I left your link. I left your link there to be surprised.
Thankfully, this URL does not say the name of the game in it, so you will be properly surprised. Anyway, real quick, like you got into Doom in college, like you had access to actual networking. Sounds like you were sort of in it. You were sort of in it. Like,
I played Q3 Test. I feel like we played that, but we didn't have the right network cards on any of the computers that network cards were expensive then.
Yes.
Like a network card was like $200 or $300 in many cases. And the ones that Quake 1 Test worked with were really, really expensive because it was the shit that id bought to put into their computers.
Yeah. You know what? I downloaded. Of course I did. Of course I did this. I was reading the Q Test README back in February when we hit that 25th anniversary. And I think it literally spells out exactly which network cards they used to develop it on. And they were like, yeah, it only works on these or something.
It only works on this stack because like because it was a DOS program. It wasn't a Windows program. It wasn't going through any kind of, there was no layer. There was no abstraction layer that was translating, hey, this is the network to your network card driver. You had to write it for the driver.
Okay, hang on. I'm going to do one. I'm going to do you one better here.
Okay, hit me.
We already went through this exercise on the Discord a few months ago. It was back in February, but I'll do it here live on the podcast as well. Thanks to the power of my NAS and everything, the search utility.
Okay.
That finds everything instantly.
Yeah.
I am not just reading the README of Qtest. I am reading the README from the zip file of Qtest that I downloaded in 1996.
Jesus Christ, Brad.
That has made the leap across hard drive after hard drive over eons.
My eyes are closed.
This Qtest README has crossed oceans of time to appear on this podcast.
It's kind of incredible, actually.
It is. I mean, like, I don't want to get too mushy or sentimental about it, but at the end of the day, it is very emotionally affecting.
See,
that I'm like literally sitting here reading a text file that I downloaded while I was in high school, and I am now over 40.
So here's the thing, though. Like, I have the hard drive that's on in the garage, probably.
Yeah,
but I can't imagine how I would even begin to organize that. Anyway,
I don't. That's what's so great about everything. If people go to Void Tools, have we talked about this?
No, but we should say we should talk about this later.
Is this material?
This is a podcast topic. I want to know more.
Am I burning podcasts here?
You're burning pod.
We are so off topic here. I am sorry. Oh gosh, I'm trying to find.
Oh, you found it. Where's your everything?
I'm reading the README. It's just a long README.
It really was.
There's a lot here.
I remember when this came out, I immediately got annoyed with two other friends who did not read the README before they called and were like, hey, I can't get this to work. I was like, did you read the README? They're like, yeah, I read the README. I was like, it took me 10 minutes to read the README, man. You could not have read the README this fast.
Yes. Like I searched for words like stack and card. Could not come up with that.
The card vendor started with a B, I believe.
Yes, it
but
totally
I don't remember.
Did. It wasn't like I know exactly what you were talking about.
If you search for IPX, that'll
here it is,
come
Beam
up.
and Whiteside. I found it.
Yeah,
I searched for a Control F and ampersand, and I found it. At this time, there are only two network protocols that Quake understands. These are IPX and TCP/IP. The only TCP/IP packets that Quake understands is BWNFS, from Beam and Whiteside. This is not a shareware product. Like that is the TCP/IP stack they were using internally. So that was the only thing you could play Qtest on. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I'm way off topic here. All I wanted to say was, I came to Doom in 94. I think I may have told this story before. I apologize if so, but we got our first family computer in 94, and I went into a Babbage's later in 94 with only a few dollars to spend. Let's say like $10 or so. And I found a boxed shareware copy of Doom, like the Doom shareware for like $7 in a box.
That's kind of a ripoff, but also better than trying to download it.
Well, I didn't have a modem at that time, but that was before. Right. We did not get a modem with the computer. I looked at the back of the box and I saw, what a Doom screenshot looks like with the gun.
Yeah.
And I assumed it was some kind of Duck Hunt style shooting gallery with just like targets flying across the screen that I was just going to aim and shoot at them.
You bought it based on the picture?
I'd never heard of it. How the hell did I know what Doom was? There was no conduit of information into my house that would tell me about Doom.
Oh my God.
I wasn't buying computer magazines at the time. Anyway, the point is, like, the idea that you could walk anywhere in first person in a video game seemed impossible. It seemed like illegal to me. So when I took that thing home and installed it and found out what that game actually was, it was like almost actually fell out of my chair. I was just like, what do you mean you could walk anywhere in this environment and I see it from the perspective I would see it from if I was there? Like, what? That alone was life-changing. Anyway, so we both had significant reasons to very highly anticipate Quake.
Well, so I found out about Doom because the guy the one person on the floor who bought Wolfenstein instead of pirating it in my freshman dorm got a postcard, I think, from them that was like, hey, check out our new game Doom coming this December. It'll be on blah, 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 whatever your FTP site of choice is. And when it finally came out, he came running down the hallway with 3 floppies and was like, you got to try this right now. It's amazing. And then I put in my 386 and it didn't run at all. So anyway.
Not even in a postage stamp size window.
I was able to run it eventually in a postage stamp size window in Windows 3.1 using 387 emulator mode in Windows at like 3 frames a second. It was not a great experience.
Nice.
Anyway, so okay.
Yeah.
So Quake comes out.
That brings us to Quake. Yeah, the last thing I wanted to say before we get to this, or maybe we'll talk about this more in line, but just how fast they were pumping these games out back then.
Oh, like, yeah. 2 years was a long time.
It's crazy to look at these dates. Doom came out in December 93.
Yeah.
Quake came out in June 96. So that's 2.5 years later. And
Doom 2 came out between those.
Right. And they made Doom 2 in the middle of that. They made between Doom 1 coming out, they made Doom 2 and Quake in 2.5 years.
So the thing about Doom 2 though is that it was basically the same engine with a couple of new monsters.
Yeah, it was not much on the engineering side.
Yeah, while the engineers were working on the new engine,
right, but
they were just jamming out levels.
And then like Quake 2 came out 18 months after Quake 1,
Well, but the weird thing about Quake though is the game took so long to come out and there was such a people probably don't understand this now, but then like if you had a year that had 3 first-person shooters come out, it was a pretty big year.
Sure,
from you could 93 until 2000.
You could count them on one hand. I mean, at first it was just Wolfenstein and then the handful of games that used the Wolfenstein engine, right? Like Blake Stone.
Well, and Commander Keen. Well, Commander Keen was before Wolfenstein, I guess, but like
that was a platformer.
There was a 3D Commander Keen too.
Was there?
There was one that used the Wolfenstein engine, I believe.
Oh, weird.
And then like all the build engine games started coming out and they were cranking those out like 1 a year, 2 a year, sometimes eventually.
Yeah.
And then we started seeing the kind of first Doom clones and stuff like Dark Forces and Duke 3D and
Heretic.
And
Heretic ran on the Doom engine.
And Hexen. Those games.
And like you said, the build engine games and like Dark Forces, that LucasArts engine, like we're starting to get some of the things that Quake would have, like looking up and down.
But not really.
But they still had that inherent limitation of being just a big 2D field at different heights, right? As opposed to a real 3D space. So it's going to be hard to paint a word picture here, but when you looked up and down in a build engine game, which you could do, then it wasn't perspective correct. No.
You just saw, it was like you were standing in front of a really tall billboard. And when you looked up, it would just be like it was stretched. You were looking at the billboard and it was stretched. It was really weird.
It looked a little odd, but it did work.
Yeah, kind of. It was hard to shoot stuff that was higher than you because the perspective was warped and the crosshair was anyway.
Also, nobody used mouse look. Like mostly looking up and down in those games was on page up and page down, which not the most accessible control scheme.
Well, I think at that point I was still like when Quake came out, I switched to mouse look immediately, but I used Control Alt Space and Shift for a long time. And I don't remember. I think Control was how you shot. I don't remember. Maybe you shot with space because you couldn't jump, I guess.
I don't know, man. I played first person shooters on a Gravis gamepad before Quake came out. So I cannot tell you.
Wow.
Also, we should compare Quake control schemes later because I had a weird one.
I was ESDF with all my well, I played competitive, so I had all my like where I am hotkeys on Q. No, direct weapon shortcuts on Q, A, and Z.
How do you define competitive?
I played in even nighttime scrub leagues that were organized, and we did scrims and had tournaments and stuff.
If they were organized, that was more than I did, which like I did the occasional pub stomping was about as far as I went, but I did quite a bit of that.
Okay, so the game comes out. It you basically needed a Pentium to run it, as I recall. Yes. It kind of ran on a 486 if you had a math coprocessor, but it used a software renderer. This was before 3D accelerators.
Yes,
also, so like there was no accelerated texture rendering, there was no mip mapping, there was no filtering. And it used the accelerated software renderer that was written in assembler by. We didn't put this in the notes.
What are you looking for a name?
I was looking for a name.
Michael, you're not thinking about Michael Abrash, are you?
I'm thinking about Michael Abrash. That's exactly.
Yes, I can just spit Quake facts out all day. I promise you.
I immediately blanked. I like if you'd asked. He's been at Oculus for a long time now, but
like even back then, I remember when they brought him on back then, and this is another topic to get into, was like all the communication they did through plan files and giving insight into development that you didn't get any other way. But I remember when they brought Abrash on back then. They talked about like Carmack talked about him like he was some kind of x86 assembly wizard. He was like a legend in. He was like a legend in machine code land.
He wrote the NT kernel.
Did he?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's wild. Was he? He was a Microsoft guy.
He was a Microsoft.
Okay, I probably knew that.
Went to Microsoft and pulled him out. He was like, "You should come do this thing."
That's incredible.
Yeah. So okay. But the thing that the thing that was amazing about the time between Doom and Quake is people were so voracious for more news about these first person shooters that these sites grew up out of nowhere, basically. Yes. Like a dude would post on his university shell space, like the latest Quake news about its next game, and they'd post like Doom mods and stuff like that. And that's where sites like Blues News and Scary's Quakeholio.
Yeah, Scary's Quakeholio then became the Sugar Shack, then is now Shack News.
Shack News, yeah.
Steve has moved on long ago.
Redwood Stomping Ground.
Stomped was for Redwood. There's like Voodoo Extreme.
The Voodoo Extreme was later, but yeah.
Was it? I guess you're right. There were a bunch of those.
But yeah, like for a while, and like this was before there were sites like GameSpot and IGN and like it was kind of before, like this was the first time the internet was useful for me for anything.
Yeah, it was kind of all happening at once. Like GameSpot did launch in 96, but like, the GameSpots and IGNs were generalist sites, right? Where these were just fan run, like community driven sites.
Yeah.
Built by people who just fucking lived and breathed this one game, right?
And like they were writing webs, like Blues News started out writing in Notepad. Like when he updated the page, he would upload an HTML file from Notepad to his server someplace.
Oh, that's so heartwarming.
And like, I mean, I guess at that point I'd probably emailed like my CS homework to my CS professor, but probably like literally looking up news about Quake mods and Quake and Doom mods was probably the first thing I did that was like that, like the internet impacted my life in a meaningful way.
Where it was like up to the minute, right? Like every day it was changing and you were actually learning about things that way.
Yeah. Like I learned how 3D renderers in the 90s worked. I learned why people were excited about 3D accelerators. I learned about like that SGI and Next machines and Sunboxes and stuff existed.
This is such a 800 tangents could proceed from this one episode. But yeah, like my fascination with like Next and Next Step and SGI workstations, like all of that comes out of the Quake development, because like Doom and Quake were built on Next boxes. They developed them on Next workstations.
Well, and you would look at like, so there was a kind of a filter for this. It started with like plan files, and occasionally like it was a weird time because these developers were like Doom, the people who worked at id during the Doom time made an unbelievable amount of money because they had profit sharing, and no one had ever made like that. Nobody had ever had a video game that was that kind of a hit before.
Totally. Like I've been, so I didn't even plan it this way, but I've been reading old plan files from that era just for fun over the last month. And
this is why we're friends, Brad.
I know. Well, there's the ultimate example of why we do this podcast together is coming up shortly, which I'm pretty excited about. But they're like, there's a quote in one of those where Carmack very casually talks about like, yeah, I bought my first Ferrari off of Wolfenstein.
Yeah.
Like a second Ferrari off of Doom. Like they were making huge amounts of money right from the beginning, right from Wolfenstein.
But they were also like all along it's not like they had publicists and shit. Like, I mean, they probably did at that point, but they were still enormous nerds, and they were working like crunching constantly to make video games. And it was like 25 to 30 year olds who kind of seemingly didn't know much about what they were doing except for how to make the games, was what it looked like on the outside. And it was a scene.
Yeah, totally.
Like there was this thing that happened in Texas, and after Quake, it kind of expanded, and places like Raven up in the north,
in Wisconsin,
in Wisconsin, and
like Valve,
Valve in Seattle, Ritual, Gearbox. I can't remember what the place that Human Head spun out of, but like these little groups of people who'd previously been making like shareware games and stuff like that suddenly had figured out this new genre that was the hottest thing in the world.
And Quake mods.
And and they started making mods for Doom, and that those people who made Doom mods ended up making studios that made Quake engine games.
Yes. Like I think like Randy Pitchford was a like well-known Quake modder before he went and started Gearbox, right?
Yeah.
Like a bunch of
also
people.
Up Close Magician was the thing he was doing to make, like he used to tell a story about how he flipped careers because he thought he was going to be a magician, and then he started making Doom mods, and then he was like, oh, this Doom mod thing seems like it might work out. Yeah. So then he stopped anyway.
Yes.
All
those studios sprang up out of that stuff. But should we talk about the game?
Well,
there's a lot to cover here, but
I just want to the last thing is that like the plan file, which is literally, we're going to have somebody on to talk about plan files in coming weeks, because I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
It was a place that you could update, it was like a pre-Twitter Twitter. You just update what you're working on, and you could run finger on any Unix machine, and it would send you what their most recent, person's email address's most recent plan update was.
So like most of the underpinnings of Unix, it actually came about to be used in like a research facility, right? Like in either a corporate or academic setting of like, oh, there's a bunch of people time sharing on this mainframe, and they all need to be able to see what each other is working on and share time, computing time and stuff like that. So like it was basically a way to like, quote unquote, finger somebody else's account and see what they had put in their plan file to get a sense of like what they were working on or what their schedule was or whatever. And yeah, the id people started using that from across the internet, and like everything else we're talking about here, that was probably my first real exposure to the concept of Unix, because what they were using to distribute these plan files was straight out of that world, right?
So I had Unix before, because I took CS classes so I could get a Unix shell account instead of a VAX shell account at UT.
That's one way to do it.
Yeah. Well, but like, yeah, those plan files were another source of data, like Carmack and Tom Hall and all of those guys at all of these different studios would post what they were working on to their plan updates. And they'd kind of like, they weren't making games in public in the way that people do, people do now when they're streaming game dev, but it was very much like, hey, you could get a glimpse of what was coming by figuring, like Carmack would talk about 3D accelerators being interesting, and then talk about standing in the shower and watching refractive patterns come across the screen through the water in the shower.
Something like that.
Be like, there's no way we can replicate this we won't be able to replicate this for at least 20 years. And it gave you a glimpse of what they were thinking about, which gave you an idea of what they were doing. And then there was this whole kind of world of Carmack whispering. It's almost like, it's like, what is, they call it Kremlinology, when you read what the official Kremlin releases are to figure out what's actually going on.
Sure.
It's the same thing. We had Carmackology back then.
Sure. I guess that's fair.
But the game was pretty good too, which worked, which helps.
Yes. I mean, the plan files, like they were a level of insight into the development process as it was happening that I feel like you really haven't seen before or since, really, because partially because everything was so grassroots back then. There were no off-the-shelf engines. There was nothing to license. Like all of this stuff was being built completely from nothing. And so it was like, ground being broken every single day that they were doing this stuff. Like that's a big part of why it was so exciting.
That's 100% true.
And the other reason I say that it hasn't really happened again since then is, like you said, these were a bunch of 25-year-old nerds with nobody watching them, telling them what to do. Like everything has to go through media approval these days, media training, 8 levels of people signing off on stuff. There's like PR plans to follow. Like this was like raw and unvarnished in a way that you don't see that often. You do see it from some indie developers. Like indie developers who are their own bosses these days can still get away with saying whatever they want, but like coming out of big studios, like it's the message is always just so kind of massaged before it gets out there now.
Well, and also like it was in a time before people realized that this was an actual business.
Yeah, that's another big part of it for sure.
Like at that point, like people were like, oh yeah, the Nintendo makes money, Sega makes money, maybe Sony makes money. It seems like that's going well for them so far. But like the PC people were kind of viewed as like weird video game perverts in a lot of ways. So yeah, it was interesting. And like, and they weren't putting out polished stuff. It was like, sometimes like you'd read a plan file and I'd be like, well, I'm going to go have to look up stuff on Usenet for 2 hours to understand what the fuck's going on here. And then you'd get to the bottom of like 3 scholarly research papers about 3D rendering. And you'd be like, oh, okay, this makes sense now. He's posted another update. I got to go more research.
Yeah, sure.
But the game was pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't quite what they pitched it as early on necessarily. Like there was all that weird early talk about like, oh, you're going to have the Hammer of Thor in it, and it's going to be some kind of weird quasi RPG, and there are going to be dragons, and they published screenshots of dragons. I don't know if you remember those.
Oh yeah.
Like they put out
the dragon ended up being that weird wavy monster in like the third act that got shrunk down. It's just the wings, I think.
Is it in there somehow? Okay.
I feel like maybe it is. I don't know, maybe not.
Early on, they were describing it very much as some kind of medieval game.
They wanted to make an RPG, it sounded like.
Yes. Like I remember like Tom Hall had a lot more narrative ambitions around there than the rest of them seemed to, because they always talked about putting story into their games. All the story ended up getting cut out by the time they shipped.
Well, or then Romero would be, or Adrian Carmack or somebody would say in an interview that, yeah, we make the whole game and we make the game fun. And then like at the last little bit, we figure out what the story is and jam it in there.
Right. But they pitched a big game for Quake that didn't really come together, and the actual shipping game, like visually and sort of thematically, is kind of a giant mess. It's like, it's this weird mishmash of like sort of dirty looking future with all these portals, and there's some Lovecraft in there, and like it's not very coherent.
It almost, it's funny, I was talking about this with a friend the other night, but it seemed like when I loaded it up, so it had a hub world, which was kind of new at that point. Like you just walked into this lobby and then you went through doors to go to the different worlds.
Very, in retrospect, like a very nice, easy way to make a shareware game where you can just bolt more episodes onto that hub.
Yeah. But the thing was, like, each world had a very distinct art style, and it almost seemed like they had 4 level designers and they never talked about what they were making once. Or maybe they built 4 different games and each game had its own unique theme, and they were like, well, shit, none of these is enough on its own. Let's just put them all in here and, call it Quake. I don't know. Yeah.
Even back then, they were not shy later on about talking about what a kind of difficult mess that development cycle was.
Well, I mean, there's a PC Gamer article. There's a couple of them. There's one that's prior to Quake 2 that you dug up, and I guess we'll put these in show notes someplace. But there's also one that Gary wrote around the time the game was like released. Gary Witt, a friend of the pod. That's just like they're just it's heartbreaking kind of, because like they're like, yeah, everybody's pretty humble about the game, and then everybody, even when they're being humble about the game, is talking shit about everybody else in the industry in a way that nobody does anymore.
Right.
Just fascinating.
Yeah. And then, of course, infamously, a month after the game released, they fired John Romero, one of the founders of the company. Yeah. Which there was that whole drama, the original scene drama, you might say. And then
in the next PC Gamer interview, Carmack talked about firing Romero and putting him on a performance plan.
Yeah.
After he was a customer.
It was like so... Right. Because Ion Storm, which Romero went to found, was licensing the Quake technology at that time. After they fired him, and then here's Carmack in this magazine talking about like, yeah, we cut his bonuses and then we fired him.
Well, but at the same time, like this whole thing was like this was also being covered on all those sites, right? Like this was all this scene drama was happening all the time in the background of, oh, by the way, these new games are coming. Anyway, so okay, things that Quake did that I hadn't seen before, and that I don't think any of us had seen before.
Yeah, totally.
The 3D environments was huge. 3D character models, huge.
Was that the first game that used 3D character models? It's definitely the first one I saw, because I remember spending like inordinate amounts of time looking at dead enemies and going like, oh my God, I can see it from every side. It's not just the same bitmap from every angle.
So it's definitely the first person shooter that used 3D character models that I played.
Okay.
There were other games that used like Hyperblade used 3D, or not Hyperblade, but like
Descent did, I'm pretty sure.
Descent was way after this though.
Oh, was it?
Descent was after. Oh, huh.
Let me
That's
just
a good question. There were definitely games that used 3D models before, like TIE Fighter used ground shaded 3D models.
Sure. But in a kind of like human or person based first person shooter, like a person running around on the ground shooting other people.
In a first person shooter world, it was unless like Marathon or something came out before and had 3D models, which I didn't know because I didn't have a Mac. It's my understanding it was the first 3D character models. It was the first thing that had internet multiplayer that I played that was like native and was a first person shooter. The client side prediction also came later.
Yeah, so that didn't ship with the game. Like that's another whole fun little subplot of this thing.
Really?
And it's another example of how fast this stuff was happening. Quake came out, it played like shit over modems. I don't know,
like super duper shit.
If people don't remember, I mean, like you'd have no idea what it felt like to play Quake with a 300 or 400 ping without any like shipping out of the box, because they had only tested it on local networks. And Carmack literally says in one of those, in like the first plan update after the game came out, when he acknowledges he literally says, we screwed up. I have a T1 to my house. I didn't realize how bad it would be.
1.5 megabits, baby.
Right. Like it's hilarious. They just didn't account for like what normal people's dial-up internet connections were like at the time. But
I mean, that's funny though. Like the picture we're painting is a real bad launch.
Kinda, yeah.
Because like the 3D character models, the thing that we didn't talk about with that is like Doom was famous for having dozens or hundreds of enemies on screen at any given time.
Yeah.
And in Quake, you had like 3, maybe 4.
Sure.
So it was a little thin.
The performance did not scale very well.
Especially like if you didn't turn on the mouse look thing, which you had to do a console command to turn on, like being able to look up and down, you would have probably not even noticed.
Yes. I mean, I didn't think of the mouse as a video game controller at that time. Like it never occurred to me to use mouse look until I read about it somewhere on like, I don't know, Stomp or one of those sites where they said to try it. Like I didn't even try looking up and down with the mouse because it didn't occur to me that that's something you could do. But anyway, like what I was gonna say is like he acknowledges like almost instantly after the game came out that the online multiplayer is terrible for anybody who's not him. But then like a month after that, he is laying out the plan for Quake World with the client side prediction model and like all this stuff. And it's like, it's another 6 months of updates and like refinement after that to get it where it ended up. But like
it ended up releasing in December, I think, right?
I think that's around the end of the year, I believe.
I feel like I downloaded it at my parents' office.
But that tightened up the network connection and did a lot of the stuff on the client side that had previously been happening on the server. And like, I assume, I'm no network engineer. I'm sure there are like a zillion games network programmers out there who could talk intelligently about this stuff or correct us. But like, I assume that basic model has trickled down through the years. Well,
it's changed pretty dramatically.
I mean, I'm sure there is a ton of nuances to it.
Like they added smoothing and all sorts of other stuff to it.
But that basic idea of keeping as much local on the game client as you can without having to send it back and forth, I assume was kind of a big deal.
It was great until people realized that you could use it to cheat. Sure. And then things started moving. Well, the other thing that happened over the last 20 years is that the cost of compute online has gone way down. So like you wouldn't be able to do that client side prediction on the servers at the time because they were like penny and 100s or something like that.
Right.
Now it's a little bit different.
Yeah. Also connections way faster, latency much lower.
Yeah.
A lot has changed.
But like I remember downloading Quake World at my dad's office on Christmas break that year and like logging in to play a multiplayer game of Quake on the internet, and it worked like it did on the LAN at school.
Yeah, it felt amazing. Like it was night and day. It was really incredible.
You could like, even with a 250 ping on a modem, you could play pretty reliably. And I did for years. Like I played, I think I had ISDN at the time because ISDN in Tennessee was cheap for inexplicable reasons.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I was so jealous of people that had ISDN back then.
64 kilobits per channel. You get 2 channels bonded and go up to 128.
Like just to put it in perspective for people who never experienced this, like if you had a 300 ping on original Quake online, if you press the key to move forward, you were waiting a third of a second to see yourself move forward. Like Like that latency was stiff and in your face.
Yeah.
Like there was nothing papering that over.
So the big thing, the thing here that we didn't talk about in the multiplayer thing is Quake used client server, and previously Doom and other multiplayer games had had some sort of weird everybody has to agree or else nothing works mode. So if anything got out of sync, the game would just stop.
Right.
So like if your latency was too bad, that's why Dwango was really neat, is because you could dial in, everybody had the same latency because you were on the same modem, and like you didn't fall out of sync like you would on, say, with a modem person trying to play Doom with a LAN person.
Right. So like what you're saying here is a single client could go belly up and not affect the rest of the game for everybody, right?
Well, and you could join and drop in midway through the game too.
Yes, like that was all even pretty revelatory back then.
Like I remember getting on like a Quake Rocket Arena server, and people would just come in and out, and the Rocket Arena server would run for hours and hours and hours before the cron job restarted it, once a day or whatever it needed to be done. The mods were a big deal too.
Like Doom had, basic map making tools. You could put out maps, and like there were total conversions, that would replace textures and enemy sprites and stuff like that. But Quake, had its own programming language essentially. Like Quake shipped with Quake C, which is what people developed the mods in, and it was like a full on, this Wikipedia page literally describes it as a compiled language.
Yeah, you could write new behaviors for almost everything in the game,
right?
Which would like Doom. In order to do that in Doom, you had to do jump through some real hoops. Probably, my understanding.
Probably not reverse engineer, but
I don't remember. I don't know if I bought a book,
hex editing the executable or something like that.
Look, there was dark magic,
right?
Just say dark magic.
But the point is that they planned right from the beginning to let people like literally program mods for the game, and that's what brought about stuff like Capture the Flag, which was like, I don't know how much CTF you played back then, but
none.
Really?
I didn't like Capture the Flag.
Are you serious?
I hated the grappling hook.
Holy shit, I loved the grappling hook.
I know. See, I went the other path. I played Rocket Arena and Clan Arena.
Okay, well, that stuff was in it for the pure
deathmatch.
That stuff was a little bit later, but the bigger thing is like it didn't ship with any modes. There were no objective-based modes in Quake. It was just deathmatch. Like I guess there was team deathmatch. I think
there was team deathmatch, but deathmatch and team deathmatch, the true game modes.
Yes, yes. Like, don't get me wrong. Deathmatch and that rocket launcher are kind of all you need, but like when CTF came about, and it literally introduced to me at least the idea of teamwork in a game like that, because I've never seen an objective based mode like that before. And it was like, holy shit, I'm grappling up onto the ceiling now. I'm defending this goal while my other teammates are flanking and trying to get this thing across the line. Like even that stuff. And that entirely came out of the community and the mod tools that they built into the game. Like that stuff emerging from the community was so mind blowing all the time.
My entire recollection, like it's funny, my whole experience with CTF is soured because it broke up my regular Quake group, because one guy got really into CTF and the rest of us didn't care about it.
Sure.
So but we were playing it at that point. Like we had a friend who ran one of the Linux labs at UT, and we would just go after lab hours and play Quake up there. And it was incredible. And we haven't even talked about GL Quake yet.
No, we haven't even gotten there. Multiskin, real quick, I just wanted to mention. Multiskin was one of the very first mods that came out, like I think a month or two after Quake shipped.
I don't know what this is.
It's the first skin pack. Like it was a skin pack. I've got it open right here. Like you can find on fandom, quake.fandom.com. You can look up Multiskin, and they've actually got the textures for all of the original Multiskin skins.
Wow. This was like Barney the Dinosaur,
real fun.
And C-3PO.
No, it was much more like teenage edgelord type stuff, as you might imagine. I just sent it to you. I don't know if you want to pull it up here, but I can tell you it featured such skins as Duke Nukem, a Stormtrooper, the Terminator, Judge Dredd.
I remember these.
The Predator, He-Man, Boba Fett, and Henry Rollins.
One thing that so a lot of the disappointment in this game came from Romero going on IRC and talking about what was going to be in it, like portals between servers and stuff like that.
Oh, I remember that. I hadn't thought about the portals between servers thing in so long.
He had promised, I feel like he promised that each weapon would have a distinct model in the hands of the characters. You'd be able to see what weapon your enemy had. And I don't think that ended up coming to play. I think it would always look the same for everybody else.
No, I think that's I'm pretty sure that made it into the game.
I think you just have the skin that's in this thumbnail. I think it always looks the same.
You're talking about like seeing the rocket launcher when somebody's using the rocket. I'm pretty sure.
So when you're in first person, you see that you have the rocket launcher, but when you're in third, when you're looking at somebody else, I don't think you do.
We need to fact check this. I'd swear that made it in.
We might just have to play Quake.
Anyway, all I want to say real quick about multi-skin is, and again, that came out of the community, but it was like the first example I saw of like changeable skins on player models, right? Like if you just want to go down a checklist of things that this game brought about, like I can't think of an earlier example of that.
Because, well, Doom, you could make your own. It's funny. This is a place where 3D made it easier, probably rather than harder. That's
what I mean. Like, if it's the first game with like 3D character player models, then it was by necessity also the first game with like changeable skins like this. And like you said, like all you're doing is painting a skin, right? Because like with Doom, you would have to animate an entire new sprite.
Yeah, you have to animate the sprite sheet, which was a pain in the butt. That's really cool. The first mod. I'm trying to think what the first mod I played was for this. I have no idea. It probably was CTF, but it was hard to download mods because they were really big. And even on ISDN, it wasn't like a speedy process.
Yeah. Multiskin, I don't see the original release date, but Multiskin 1.1 came out on August 1st, 1996, which is like 5 weeks after the game shipped. So like it was damn near the first mod for Quake. And again, like I think it was pretty influential, but
the person who made it was probably hired by Ritual like 15 minutes after it came out.
That's exactly what happened back then.
Those artists, like I remember somebody would release literally there'd be a post on Blues News and a new map would come out for like Rocket Arena or CTF or something. And then like 3 days later, it would be like Steve Nyes, the guy who released the map on Tuesday is now working at such and such.
Totally. Like I remember trying to Yost Schur, I think is how you pronounce his name.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that name?
Rhymes with toast.
Like he was a really well-known Doom mapper, or I don't know if he started in Doom or if he started with Quake.
Didn't he end up writing one of the map editors or something?
That might be possible. It's just a random name that came to mind, but like the mappers, like popular community mappers became like minor celebrities in their own right. And then, they all just got hired up by all these satellite studios. It was such a weird, like thriving community. This is still in the time where like Quake came out and there wasn't another 3D shooter for a really long time. Oh, like I guess
Quake 2 probably almost.
Quake 2 and Unreal. I don't remember when
Unreal came out, yeah.
Unreal came out, I think in 98, right?
Unreal came out between Quake 1 and Quake 2, if I recall.
Did it?
It had colored lights.
It did have colored lighting. It's no, this says 98. May 98 for Unreal. I think it was
Quake 2 is sooner?
Quake 2 was before Unreal 1.
Okay.
Unreal got a lot of hype though. It was definitely in the news quite a bit.
You could go outside.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the big deal.
There was that big ship and that waterfall.
They told a story.
All right, last thing here on my list that I made of things that I thought Quake was the first to do.
Yeah.
You brought this up earlier. I had to stop myself. Do you want to click? Do you want to click the link now?
I know what it says. Marathon had it before.
Yes,
Quake.
This GuinnessWorldRecords.com link for first use of free look and a first person shooter goes to Marathon by Bungie in 1994.
Dark Souls had that, or Dark Forces. Forces had that.
Did Dark Forces have mouse look?
Yeah, you could look up and down. It may not have had mouse. You know what? It might have been page up and page down when I think about it.
It definitely was that. That was the default.
Yeah.
This according to this, Marathon was the first game with mouse look.
I added the other thing about id at that time was that they never had release dates for anything ever.
Yes,
they did that. I think that's also why people were so cranked up about plan files and all that stuff all the time, because like often like the release would be somebody would update their plan file and be like, yo, it's on the FTP server.
Right. It's like, oh, Quake test is out.
Yeah.
By the way, here's a test. You can play it.
And like the FTP server, one of those PC Gamer articles is like, yeah, the FTP server will support 2,000 connections at any given time. And for the last 18 days, it's been full 24 hours a day for people downloading their blah, blah, blah. That's why I wanted the shell account, Brad. Because the shell account came with 20 megabytes of space and I could download my stuff to that in like seconds and then grab it, Kermit it over from there.
Smart thinking.
Yeah.
That CS major paid off.
Well, I didn't last. I got a B in CS 100 and never looked back.
That's about exactly the path that I took, actually.
But they never took away my shell account.
Now that you mention it, I also got through about the first semester or year and was like, it's time for a pivot.
So
anyway, when it's done is what you're getting at, was the classic refrain in the community.
One of the weird things about Quake is that they didn't expose stuff in the UI, like turning on mouse look,
right?
Or the fact that there were 6 deathmatch maps.
Yeah. Like
just
you
built in.
You were just editing your autoexec.cfg to do things like turn on mouse look automatically.
Yeah, but like there was no menu way to get to the DM maps.
Oh, you're right. That's right. Because like, I'm guessing, in their mind, you're just going to be connecting to servers on the internet and they'll be the ones setting the map list. So what do you as the player need to know about what multiplayer maps are in the game?
So at some point, I like loaded up to play multiplayer the first time. I was like, wait, what the fuck is this map? I've never seen this before. Because in Doom, you just played multiplayer in the single player maps,
right?
Or in map pack that somebody had downloaded. But really back then you didn't like the servers wouldn't automatically distribute the maps to you in Doom. So you had to have the same map pack on that all your friends did. So it was a real pain in the butt to make sure that everybody had the right stuff to play. So you ended up literally just playing the same maps that were built into the game all the time. And like, I'm going to put this out there. I think DM3 is probably the best DM and team DM multiplayer map of all time.
Yeah, so that was what I was referring to earlier when I opened up this notes doc earlier and saw that you had just written in here, can we just talk about DM3? I was like, all right, this is why we do a podcast together. DM3 is unequivocally not just my favorite Quake map, but my favorite multiplayer map of all time.
Like I really like Arangel. I
don't know them by name.
It's the default map from PUBG.
Oh, okay. I thought that was a Quake map. I thought that was getting into the era where Quake maps had actual names and not just like Q2 DM6 or whatever.
No. I like Arangel. I like Dust in Team Fortress, but not in Counter-Strike.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Counter-Strike.
No,
I'm not familiar with it. I never played a lot of TF or TF2. I'm not familiar with that version.
So in TF, it was a push map where like one team defends, the other team attacks, and you like it was just asymmetrical and really good.
DE Dust is quite good. But
that's fine.
But nothing is DM3.
DM3. So DM3 had this strong side, weak side thing that was really interesting and weird in that literally it's 2 circles that they cross at a midpoint.
Yeah.
And there's a skill jump. There's a couple of skill jumps. There's a rocket. Fuck, we haven't even talked about rocket jumping.
God, rocket jumping is another thing from the yes.
Oh my God. Rocket jumping. I learned about rocket jumping from Blues News.
Right.
He posted here's how to rocket jump tutorial and a script. And I was like, oh man, this changes everything. C was rocket jump for years.
Abusing game physics in ways that the developers didn't even anticipate to change the game.
Yeah.
Also happened in Quake.
Well, but so there's a strong side and a weak side, and one team usually spawned on the strong side, and one team spawned on the weak side. The strong side had the rocket launcher, the lightning gun. I think the
mega health. Are you talking about the big room with all the water?
Quad damage,
yes,
mega health,
the rocket. The mega
health vulnerability.
The mega health spawns on the hump in that little courtyard, which I want to say is sort of the connector between the two areas, isn't it?
No, the invulnerability spawns in the court. No,
does it?
The invulnerability spawns in the side room off of the quad damage room.
That sounds right.
And there's isn't the mega health under the water?
Pretty sure the mega health isn't there. Maybe there's more than one.
Maybe there might have been 2. Anyway,
we're getting into some pretty fine detail.
One is armor and one is health.
Okay.
Anyway, the point is, if you start on that side, you were pretty much guaranteed to win, except for you somehow weren't, because the other guns, if you worked in unison and pushed hard, then you could take that away from you could take those spots away from the other team pretty easily. And it ended up being a real like who holds the rocket launcher room off of the lightning gun water room ended up being like this incredibly like the meta around that evolved really, really fast. And also like it seemed like there was no skill ceiling on that part of the game because usually the rocket launcher is really good, but because you were fighting in a room that was you were on a little ledge surrounded by water, this whole strategy of shooting at people's feet and knocking them around didn't really mess you up all that bad.
Yeah.
And also, if shit went really sideways and you could get the lightning gun, you just had to jump in the water and kill everybody in the room.
Yes.
So then it reset the whole level.
Yes. I always thought it was a pretty brilliant decision to not let you just shoot the lightning gun into the water from dry land. You had to get in there and to start and discharge it.
Oh yeah, you had to kill yourself.
You had to eat it along with everybody else to get all those kills.
Or you had to get the invulnerability and then swim through and get there fast enough.
Yes.
But like Quake also has all sorts of weird physics stuff because it's the trigonometry of running and jumping. You could end up building up incredible speed in that game. There were a ton of skill jumps in that particular map. So like the 2 loops were connected around this round courtyard. and the upper floor, there were 2 floors around the courtyard, one on the ground level and one up higher, and you could jump across from one side to the other if you were good at doing the skill jump almost 100% of the time. The good people could do it every time.
Yeah.
And then grab quad damage, and like the quad damage was an incredible force multiplier for the whole thing. Like anytime you heard that whom 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 sound when the quad damage got picked up, it was amazing.
Yeah, like you talking about all these like skill shots with rocket jumps and like leading people with the rockets and all that stuff. It makes me realize this is the first multiplayer game I remember that had like an emerging, evolving metagame, right? And like, I mean, I guess that is a kind of a natural consequence of it being the first major online multiplayer game, period, right? But like,
I mean, it happened with Doom, but because Doom wasn't online, it was like it was like fighting game scene, right? There were like local clusters of like the Chicago people like to play Baraka and never play, like the Chicago Mortal Kombat people like these characters, and this is how they play, and they play defensive, and like Quake didn't have that because everybody was just connecting to the same servers around the country, and you'd go wherever your ping was good.
Right. Well, but I mean, also just the range of possibilities was so much narrower in Doom because you couldn't jump. You couldn't bounce people around with rockets as much. Like the physics were a little more muted. Like
you had to hit them with the rockets, or they had to be as long as you weren't standing next to a wall, it was pretty hard to hit you with a rocket.
Also, like you couldn't aim up and down, so you couldn't control the splash damage in different directions as well. Like there was just a lot more that could happen with Quake, and so people found a lot more to exploit in it. And like
and for me, that stuff happened. Like that stuff peaked. It didn't peak, but like the moment that became clear to me was when Rocket Arena came out, and you would get like Rocket Arena was this. It was a mod where you'd put like 6 or 8 people in a server, and you would do 1v1 deathmatch with you'd instead of having to go collect the weapons on the map, you'd spawn in with all the weapons, and you could pick whatever you wanted and fight the other person. So like they were almost always cylindrical arenas. Sometimes there'd be barriers and stuff around. Sometimes they'd just be wide ass open. It was like who could rocket jump and splash damage the person best. And all the spectators, instead of like sitting in a lobby or something, they would be running around with axes on the top of the map, and the ceiling of the map would be see-through, so you could watch and learn and see what other people were doing, which was revelatory.
Yeah,
like totally. That was incredible.
Yep.
Oh, it was such a good game.
It really was quite influential, I think we can say. We could probably sit here for another hour talking about it, but I think, like I said, I think beyond the game itself and how addicted I was to it for years, like introducing me to things like Usenet and Unix and big workstations and networking stuff, and just like all these various computing technologies that I then became pretty infatuated with over time.
Yeah,
like this game was a conduit to a lot of bigger stuff in that space.
Well, and
in a way that games were not. I
mean, and when GL Quake, which we might have to do a whole episode about GL Quake sometime soon.
Yeah. I mean, we did that episode about 90s 3D accelerators a while back. So we kind of touched on it a good bit then. But
it was the reason I started building computers, because I wanted to try all the video cards and see how they worked with GL Quake.
Right.
Right.
Totally.
Like it was the reason I learned how to build computers in the first place was because my Pentium 60 wasn't good enough to, like, I couldn't fit a video card in it because it was a pizza box machine.
Yes.
And I wanted to get a tower, and I built a K6 and put a Voodoo 2 in it. And I was like, this is fucking cool. I like this.
Quake is 100% the reason that I also started building computers when I did.
Yeah. If I hadn't, like, we talked about your nice badge lady in Atlanta that let you into E3 the first time. Like I wouldn't have done the things that led me to where I am now had it not been for Quake.
I think that's a pretty safe statement that if not for that game, I don't know that either one of us would be sitting here right now.
No, I'd probably live in Knoxville still.
man.
I mean, Knoxville's fine. I like Knoxville.
Yeah.
I think on that note,
yeah, I was, real quick, we could talk about engine licensing, but it was kind of a big deal. It was a big deal for Quake for a few years.
Well, I mean, it was a big deal because it established the business that Epic then came to dominate over the last 2 console generations.
So that's kind of what the long-term story of that is. Like, id was out there licensing Blake Stone was built on the Wolfenstein engine. Like, they were licensing their tech from day one, and there were a ton of games built on Quake 1, Quake 2, and Quake 3, but then it kind of stopped, and Unreal really ran away with that market after that.
Well, I mean, look, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's weird about id to talk about. Like, there was the idea that, like, one of the things Carmack pushed early, and he comes up in one of those Quake PC Gamer interviews, but he was like, the technology and the game should work together, right? It shouldn't be like the technology people say, hey, here's your thing, and then artists go dump stuff into it and make a game. And then they did exactly that thing by licensing the engine and being like, yo, good luck. But also, like, here's the engine, good luck, go make a game. But also that first crop of Quake licensees, like there were like 6 of them or 7, I think, all told.
Something like that.
It was like Sin and Half-Life and Heretic 2 and Hexen 2 and Duke Nukem Forever, which obviously did not end up shipping on a Quake engine at all.
Oh.
Daikatana.
Yes. I believe Anachronox.
Anachronox was the other one.
Was a Quake engine game. I mean, down the line, like Infinity Ward used Quake 3 as the base for Call of Duty,
Yeah.
Like it did span a pretty wide range of games in terms of engine licensing, but that fell off after Quake 3 pretty hard. I always got the sense that they just didn't support the engine licensing the way that Epic did. Like Epic turned it into a business, right?
Yeah. That's exactly. I mean, it seemed like people used it until Epic made it hard to say no to Epic.
Right. Just because
making the tools better.
Tools and documentation and all that stuff were better. But like, you heard stories I don't know how true this still is, but like you would hear stories for years of like, there's still some Quake 1 code kicking around in these very late period Valve and Infinity Ward games.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell which ones have it because they have the portions copyright on their pages, on their credit pages.
Yes.
I was like, the other thing is it's so hard. Like the only other people that were making 3D games that were quite like this until the Quake engine licensees came out was like Dark Forces, Jedi Knight was somewhere in that window.
Was kind of not quite to that level of technology, but it was in that ballpark.
It was janky looking 3D guys, whereas these were kind of meaty looking 3D guys.
Sure. And like the lighting wasn't as good and stuff like that, but it was not. It was competitive.
They were fun.
Yeah. Like Unreal 1 was the first game that came out with brand new technology that could rival what it was doing at the time. Well,
and then what? Sin and Half-Life and Heretic 2 came out in the same year within like a month of each other, I think.
That sounds right.
Yeah. So like it's a weird thing. Sin came out in November of 98 and Half-Life came out, the Sin Heretic 2 and Half-Life came out the same basic month. It's incredible. Like it cast a long shadow, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, for sure.
Quake did. Yes. Anyway. So, I mean, did we learn anything this week? I still like Quake, I guess, is the thing I learned.
I would play some Quake.
We should play some Quake, man.
Our friend of the podcast, Wes Fenlon, has been setting up some Quake server stuff.
Really?
Yes. Maybe we should play some Quake.
I would play some Quake. I love Quake. Hit me up.
Yes.
This is the part of the show where we thank our patrons. Thanks, patrons.
Yes, thank you very much, patrons. You make this possible.
Yeah, you make the show possible. We really appreciate it. Whether you are a $2, hey, I just want to hang out in the Discord patron, or one of our fabulous executive producers like Andrew Slowski, the Bunny Fiend, Jacob Chappell, Joel Kroska, Twinkle Twinkie, David Allen, or James Kamek. We appreciate you all, everyone.
Thank you so much.
This is, as we say every week, this is a listener supported show. So without you all, we wouldn't be here.
Yep. True.
And
I can confirm that is true.
Yeah. So, and I feel like we're starting to find TechPod solutions for all of our problems now.
That could go good or bad.
We'll find out. I still feel like we don't need moderation, but sometimes people need a little help resolving conflicts. And so we introduced a new concept to the TechPod Discord this month.
Yes.
Should we talk about it? Is this a bad idea?
I don't know.
Okay. Look, basically, when people have conflicts of interest, we made a special room for them, and they can go in where it's the only room that they're allowed to contribute to on the Discord until such times they resolve their conflicts. And it's like a enforced timeout.
We have not actually employed this concept. We just sort of put it in place as
it's more of a benevolent threat is what I like to think of it as.
Sure.
Anyway, Yeah. We were going to automate it, but we realized that would be monstrous and a bad idea. So anyway,
do not crowdsource moderation.
Do not crowdsource moderation. That's a good advice. But we also have fabulous conversations pretty much all the time in there. Every time I dip in, it's something good is happening. So if you want to check it out, you can go to patreon.com/techpod. Again, that's patreon.com/techpod. Are we going to commit to raising prices at the end of the month, Brad? Changing tiers?
Maybe.
We are theoretically.
It's not raising prices. It's same tiers, just different.
Well, we're going to probably get rid of the $2 tier.
Yeah, that's probably.
I think. Yeah,
so this seems to be the way it's going.
But if you're on the $2 tier now, you'll be able to keep it forever.
That's right.
So, that's something to think about. And on that note, I think we should call it a show. As always, thank you, sir. This was fun.
Yeah.
I love, man, look, if we ever want to do a spin-off podcast, I would do one that's just talking about, like, we could just start. Blues News is still the same, man. It's still there.
I mean, everything in this wheelhouse, everything in this, and under the umbrella of what we've been talking about today is like my favorite shit ever. So
could we do just like a Quake in real life where we start at like the Doom release day and we go through each day's news and do a weekly wrap up for that week in Doom and Quake history?
Just get one of those old sites to like dump their entire database for us and we could just follow along in real time.
Dude, we could just go back on the archive on Blues News is what I'm saying.
What?
It's still there.
What you're saying is we really just need a time machine.
I mean, I don't want to go back. I like where I am now, but I'm just saying, like, it was an interesting time. It was a formative time for the internet and for video games.
And for us.
We'll see y'all next week. Thanks for listening, everybody.